This video is a beginner guide to housing assistance programs available in North Dakota. The video will review Section 8 housing vouchers, tax credit programs, subsidized housing, public housing, and some general housing terms. Did you know? Almost nowhere in the United States can someone working full-time at minimum wage pay for a one-bedroom apartment without spending more than 30% of their income. Meet Edward. Edward has twins. Edward works 40 hours per week at a hotel. Right now, he is paying 60% of his income on rent, and somehow he must use the rest to pay bills, buy food, and raise his kids. Edward applies for the housing voucher program at the local housing authority to help cover rent costs. There is a 2-year waiting list because the demand is high and funds from the federal government are limited. 2 years later, Edward gets a call that his name was drawn for a housing voucher. Edward can use this voucher to live in any kind of housing if it meets inspection and cost standards, and if the landlord accepts the federal contract. Each month, the voucher is worth a certain amount of money, and Edward must pay the difference. Every month, Edward pays 30% of his income in rent, and the voucher covers the rest. After a year, Edward decides to move to a city where he can get a better job and be closer to family. The Section 8 voucher transfers with him anywhere in the country if he works out the details with the current housing authority before moving. In most cases, Edward will have to live in an area for a year before exercising the move option again. Sometimes housing vouchers are attached to a specific housing, and these are called project-based vouchers. Project-based vouchers do not transfer with families. If a family leaves a project-based voucher unit, the next available household receives that voucher. The Housing Voucher Program and funding are federal awards granted by specific rules. Portability allows the clients to move with assistance for employment and education opportunities, family unification, and any reason if the household meets eligibility. The private-public partnership that happens with a housing voucher is popular throughout the country. The demand outstrips funding availability at nearly all housing authorities, creating long waiting lists. Some housing authorities in North Dakota anticipate 4-year waiting periods. Some larger housing authorities in the country have 10-year waiting lists, and others close their programs to new applications. Congress allocates the funds to the HUD budget. Allocations only allow small cost of living adjustments and do not consider local needs. Housing authorities typically do not have emergency funds and cannot jump applicants. Generally, subsidized housing complexes are owned by a private developer and have a housing contract with HUD or USDA. Tenants must apply directly with the owner and meet qualifications. Tenants pay 30% of their adjusted income towards rent. Rental assistance is tied directly to that building. The federal contract may stipulate if the building accepts only families with minor children, elderly, disabled, or is open to any eligible applicant. HUD and USDA restrict the rent amounts allowed and funding sources available. These projects may leave the subsidy contract when the contract expires. This is Dakota. Dakota has spina bifida and uses a wheelchair. She applied for a housing voucher but could not find an accessible unit that accommodates her needs. A nearby subsidized complex has openings that are wheelchair accessible and has an elevator. Dakota applies for a unit and is accepted quickly. The subsidized unit allows Dakota to live independently with the security of housing assistance. Public housing refers to housing units that are owned by a government entity and have a federal government contract. Public housing units may target specific populations. The housing authority will determine the eligibility and have the client pay 30% of their adjusted income towards rent. Clients choose apartments located in the complex, and the assistance is only for that specific unit. HUD and USDA restrict the rent amounts allowed and the funding sources available. Not all housing authorities have public housing complexes. Ramo and her 3 children need housing assistance. The voucher program waitlist is years long, and Ramo needs to leave a bad family situation. A local public housing complex is within walking distance of schools and a park. Ramo qualifies for a public housing unit and moves her family. Months later, Ramo can concentrate on her children's education and finding work at a nearby store. This is how the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, or LIHTC, changes or develops property into affordable housing. Ryan is a nonprofit developer, and he wants to turn the abandoned downtown building into apartments that families can afford. Ryan has done his research and the financials work. The nonprofit can maintain the apartments, and there are plenty of people who work in the area that need affordable housing. Ryan meets with neighborhood residents and businesses, and they think the project would revitalize the area. Ryan meets with his development team, and he's ready to go. Except the program needs $750,000 to start. Where can the project get that money? Ryan knows about the low-income housing tax credit. His project meets the program requirements, so he applies to the agency overseeing these tax credits. The agency has limited tax credit amounts to give out each year and selects Ryan's project for funding. Hometown Community Bank is trying to find a way to improve the bank's CRA rating. The rating allows banks to borrow funds at better rates. Last year, the rating was low, which means the bank did not invest enough in low to moderate income communities. Hometown also pays a lot in taxes. Maria, the investment officer, meets with Ryan, the local developer. Hometown Community Bank will buy $1 million in tax credits for $750,000 and become a partner in the housing project for the next 15 years. Sharing the risk, the bank can then use the tax credit to take $100,000 off the tax bill every year for the next 10 years. And their investment benefits the community and improves the bank's rating. The families now have safe, affordable, and decent units to live in, and the community had a positive redevelopment. Dale and Christy are a recently retired couple. They receive a small pension and Social Security. The reoccurring medical expenses take a large portion of their income, making it difficult to pay rent and buy food. They do not qualify for food stamps. A new tax credit property just opened that has some low-income units. They don't qualify for the low-income units, but they do qualify for a moderate-income unit. The tax credit property allows for the couple to budget and maintain safe and healthy living. There are many types of housing authorities. Some housing authorities offer rental assistance like Section 8 vouchers. Others offer public housing, and some are just for development purposes. If the housing authority offers federally funded assistance, it must enter into a contract with HUD. Federal assistance requires renewal allocations from U.S. Congress. There are federal rules governing the use of housing assistance. Housing assistance can only be used for rent and utilities and cannot cover caregiver, garages, and other expenses. Each housing authority has a set of rules that are available to the public. The Housing Board of Commissioners approves and reviews the rules to comply with HUD, federal, state, and local laws and fair housing regulations. Some rules may differ greatly between housing authorities, and it is best to contact the local housing authority. Fair housing and equal opportunity laws apply to all housing, regardless of assistance programs or market rate rentals. The North Dakota Department of Labor, Human Rights Division, and High Plains Fair Housing provide enforcement, education, and research. If you have questions about housing assistance programs in North Dakota, please reach out to your local housing authority.